Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. Pakistan has offered to let India's Deputy High Commissioner visit the line of control, giving New Delhi a chance to prove its claims of destroying the so-called terror camps. The BJP-led government is once again using anti-Pakistan rhetoric to divert the Indian people's attention from falling economic figures. In a recent episode, the Indian Army chief claimed to destroy militant camps in Azad Kashmir without giving a shred of evidence. But to let the world know about the veracity of Indian claims, Pakistan has invited UN observers and the media to visit the line of control. Islamabad says a visit can be arranged as early as tomorrow. Pakistan's Foreign Office also summoned India's Deputy High Commissioner Gaurav Ahluwalia over ceasefire violations by the Indian Army. Pakistan condemned the deliberate targeting of civilian populated areas along the line of control by Indian forces. In another development, India is forcing detained Kashmiri politicians to sign a bond surrendering their right to speak against the illegal annexation of the occupied valley. New Delhi has amended its criminal law to chalk out the affidavit demanding complete silence over recent events. Signing the bond has been declared as an essential price for release from Indian prisons. The second clause asks them to submit 10,000 Indian rupees as surety and an additional 40,000 rupees in case of violation. Reacting to the report, Indian authorities defended the change as being absolutely legal. In a related development, two more British lawmakers have raised their voice against India's clampdown in occupied Kashmir. Speaking at the Kashmir conference in London, MPs Matt Rodda and Phillips Lee spoke in support of Kashmiri's right to self-determination. Speaking at the event, Rodda said he was shocked to learn 9 million people were living in radio silence since 5th of August. Lee said the UN must implement its Security Council resolutions to settle the Kashmir issue once and for all. Meanwhile, hundreds of Kashmiris and locals held an anti-India protest in the Canadian city of Montreal. The protesters said they are speaking for Kashmiris suffering at the hands of Indian forces for the past 7 decades. New Delhi's lockdown and communication blackout in the occupied valley has entered its 78th day. In India, voting to elect the state legislatures of Maharashtra and Haryana has ended. Ballots were cast for 288 seats in the Maharashtra State Assembly and 90 in Haryana. The ruling BJP has formed a coalition with the extremist Shiv Sena party to retain power in both the states. Bypolls were also held for 2 Lok Sabha constituencies and 51 seats in 18 state assemblies. The elections come a day after India launched unprovoked attacks across the line of control, falsely claiming it targeted 3 terror camps. Yesterday, Congress leader Akhilesh Singh said the BJP government made claims of strikes against Pakistan whenever there are elections in major states. President Tayyip Erdogan says he will decide Turkey's next step in Syria after meeting Russia's President Vladimir Putin tomorrow. Erdogan is due to hold talks with Putin in Russia's Black Sea resort of Sochi. Last week, Ankara and Washington agreed to a 5-day truce in northeastern Syria. The Syrian Kurdish YPG militia was allowed to withdraw from a border safe zone that Turkey aims to establish. Erdogan says Turkish military operations in northeastern Syria will resume if the withdrawal is not complete within the 5-day time frame. The 120-hour Washington brokered ceasefire will expire tomorrow at 1900 GMT.
Terrorism can't be fought with new walls. Instead, we need to walk hand in hand towards a brighter future. We can't confine ourselves within borders of comfort. This is a question for everybody and depends on which side of history we want to be on. Are we going to stand with justice or tyranny? It is unjust to dump this responsibility on countries bearing the brunt of irregular migration and terror. This can no longer be sustained.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the Syrian government and Kurds have asked Russia to help them start a dialogue. Moscow has emerged as a leading power broker in Syria after it launched a military intervention in 2015. Foreign Minister Lavrov said direct contact between Turkey and Syria is also necessary to stabilize the region.
Dialogue between the Kurds and Damascus is needed, and we are ready to encourage this dialogue. Both sides expressed their interest in Russia's help in this process, and of course, dialogue between Turkey and the Syrian Arab Republic is also needed.
Iran has rejected the establishment of Turkey's military posts in Syria, calling for diplomatic solution. Foreign Ministry spokesman Abbas Mousavi said the integrity of Tehran's key ally must be respected. Tehran has repeatedly warned against the violation of Syria's borders and the occupation of its territory. Earlier, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said he will set up surveillance military posts inside Syria to ensure the withdrawal of the Kurdish forces. In a speech, Erdogan said if the Kurds don't vacate the area, Turkish forces will start where they left off. U.S. troops withdrawing from northeastern Syria have crossed into Iraq. Witnesses say armored vehicles carrying troops entered Iraq through the Sahela border crossing in the northern Dohuk province. They also claim to have seen 30 American trailers and Hummer vehicles carrying heavy equipment. They said the U.S. troops crossed into the semi-autonomous Kurdistan region of Iraq. This comes despite U.S. President Donald Trump's claim that U.S. forces would not be deployed to any risk zones in the Middle East. But U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper said troops withdrawing from Syria will not be sent home. Speaking to reporters, Esper said that the U.S. is not going to leave the Middle East in a state of turbulence. In Lebanon, the cabinet has approved a package of reforms to pacify protesters, calling for the government's removal. Speaking after a cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Saad Hariri said no new taxes will be imposed in next year's budget. Massive protests have rocked all major Lebanese cities over allegations of fiscal indiscipline and corruption. The demonstrations are the biggest in Lebanon since 2005. With tens of thousands of people on the streets across the country, the government has rushed to implement long-delayed reforms. Many austerity measures have been approved, including the slashing of the lawmakers' salaries by 50%. Hariri has also announced power plants will be privatized and that he supports protesters' demand for early elections.
50% reduction in salaries of current and ex-lawmakers and ministers, a reduction in the budget of the Development and Reconstruction Committee, the Fund for the Displaced and the Committee of the South by 70%.
Defense Secretary Mark Esper says the U.S. will continue military operations against the Taliban until a peace settlement on Afghanistan is reached. Speaking to the media in Kabul, Esper said that the U.S. is not planning any Syria-type pullout from Afghanistan. He said Washington is committed to restoring peace in Afghanistan.
The United States remains fully committed to helping Afghans create a peaceful, stable, and prosperous Afghanistan, and to supporting the Afghans' efforts led by the government towards peace. A negotiated political settlement among Afghans is the best path to achieving this outcome.
U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi and a congressional delegation has made an unannounced visit to Afghanistan. The delegation met the top Afghan leadership, including President Ashraf Ghani, and discussed security, economic situation, development, and governance. In a statement, Pelosi said her delegation was briefed by the U.S. diplomats on reconciliation efforts with the Taliban. She said the delegation stressed Afghan women must be at the table for the reconciliation talks. Britain's House of Commons Speaker John Bercow has refused to allow a vote on Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. He told MPs that debating the motion would be repetitive and disorderly. Prime Minister Johnson's fresh effort to stage the vote was turned down by Speaker Bercow. The Speaker said the vote would break the convention against asking MPs the same question twice in quick succession. Prime Minister Johnson wanted the voting 2 days after MPs foiled the same attempt on Saturday. The Speaker says circumstances have not changed since Saturday when MPs backed a move forcing Johnson to ask the EU for a delay in Brexit. Bercow said he came to the decision on the basis of a parliamentary convention dating back to 1604. Tory MP Bernard Jenkins accused Bercow of bias, saying it was remarkable how often the Speaker pleased one lot and not the other. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam has apologized to the city's Muslim community after police fired a water cannon at a mosque last night. Lam visited the mosque in Kowloon district, her head covered with a shawl, to express her regret to Muslim leaders over the incident. Lam thanked Muslim community leaders for repeatedly calling for calm during the political turmoil that has gripped the city for the past 5 months. Masked protesters also came out to help clean Hong Kong's biggest mosque after police hit it with jets of blue dye and water. The city's police said the truck sprayed water on the mosque's front gate by accident.
This is what they apologize.
That's why.
That's why they apologize. It is their mistake.
North Korea says the US and South Korea must come up with new solutions for the current standoff in the Korean peninsula. Vice Minister for the People's Armed Forces Kim Hyong-ryong warned that hostile policies towards Pyongyang will lead to serious consequences. He said the situation has relapsed into a dangerous, vicious cycle of worsening tensions because of the actions of the US and South Korea. Pyongyang expressed discontent at the lack of progress in its negotiations with Washington. Earlier this month, North Korea threatened to end denuclearization talks, accusing the US and South Korea of provocative actions. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned with Indices. Welcome back. Canadians are voting in a federal election seen largely as a referendum on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's leadership. Voters are casting their ballots in 338 precincts across the country. Top contenders in the polls are the ruling Liberals and the Progressive Conservatives led by Andrew Scheer. Surveys predict a tight race as Trudeau's popularity plunged after recent blackface scandal. Healthcare was the top issue during this year's election campaign, with the climate crisis not far behind. 170 seats are needed to form a majority government. Pre-poll surveys show neither Trudeau nor Scheer is anywhere near that threshold. Evo Morales is leading Bolivia's presidential election race, securing 45% of the vote with most of the ballots counted. But he is likely to face a second-round runoff against rival Carlos Mesa after failing to secure an outright majority. This will be the first time Morales faces a runoff vote in his 3 consecutive successful presidential polls. His rival Mesa celebrated his triumph in getting to the second round with 38% of the votes. South Korean-born evangelical pastor Shi Hyun-cheong came third with 9% of the votes. Shi's support for either candidate will be crucial for the second round on 15th of December. Spain's acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says there is no room for violence during protests in Catalonia. Sanchez was speaking in Brussels as tens of thousands of Catalan separatist protesters held a demonstration in Barcelona. A court decision to sentence 9 pro-independence leaders has triggered massive protests in the region. The socialist leader said the right to protest must be protected, but it must always be exercised peacefully.
Those responsible for acts of violence will be identified and be taken before the courts to receive the corresponding sanctions. That is, there is no space or impunity in relation to the serious acts of violence we have witnessed over recent days in different cities in Catalonia.
In Brazil, 3 people have been killed after a small plane crashed into parked cars in the state of Belo Horizonte. Police said 3 others were injured in the accident. The single-engine plane crashed in Siqueira moments after taking off from the Carlos Prates airport. The crash triggered explosions and several cars caught fire. The death toll in Chile has risen to 8 as violent anti-government protests continue. The demonstrations erupted over price hikes and social inequality on Friday. The government has declared a 15-day emergency amid escalating tensions in 7 major cities. After an emergency meeting, President Sebastián Pinera deployed troops to the city for the first time. 5 people were burned to death in a clothing factory fire near the capital Santiago after the premises were ransacked by the protesters. Defying the emergency curfew, hundreds of protesters have stormed metro stations in Santiago. Police and the recently deployed military are using tear gas to disperse the demonstrators. Crop stubble burning around the Indian capital has turned New Delhi's air toxic. Every winter, a noxious blend of car fumes and industrial emissions chokes the capital, making it one of the world's most polluted cities. Latest government data shows the air of the Indian capital has once again plunged to poor on the Global Air Quality Index. With 258 points on the chart, the city is a couple of steps away from finding itself in a severe air crisis. The government says 3,000 incidents of stubble burning in adjacent areas since late September has exacerbated the situation. The front page of every newspaper in Australia is blacked out today in protest against national security laws, which journalists say have stifled reporting and created a culture of secrecy. The campaign by the Right to Know coalition was sparked by federal police raids on the national broadcaster ABC. A News Corps journalist's home was also ransacked earlier this year. The media organization said the raids had been conducted over articles which had relied on leaks from the whistleblowers. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says press freedom is important to Australia's democracy, but the rule of law needs to be upheld.
The government believes absolutely in press freedoms in this country, and we have taken steps. We have taken the steps to add additional defences into our laws to ensure that journalists, Mr Speaker, can get about their task. In fact, Mr Speaker, in protections that exceed that apply to many others around the country.
A 3-hour rescue mission has saved Jimmy the border collie in Australia. The pooch was stranded at the base of a cliff at the Bells Beach in the state of Victoria. State emergencies personnel and the country fire authority attempted the dangerous 15-meter climb down the cliff. They strapped Jimmy into a harness and made the slow climb back. Jimmy had his owner's telephone number on his collar tag. Both the owner and the pooch were relieved to be reunited with smiles and a wagging tail. For stories to follow right after a short break, stay tuned with us. Lows on the highs of the business world now. U.S. stocks open higher on fresh signs of progress in U.S.-China trade talks, but a fall in Boeing's shares capped early gains. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained slightly at the open. S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite have also risen. Most European stock markets are trading flat as investors wait to see whether the UK will leave the EU at the end of the month. The FTSE 100 in London and Paris's CAC 40 index are marginally higher. Frankfurt's DAX index is bucking the trend, gaining a near 1%. The mood was similar in Asia, with Tokyo's Nikkei 225 and the Kospi in Seoul rising only fractionally. The Shanghai Composite and Hang Seng Index recovered from early losses on hopes that the US and China would reach a trade deal by next month. The Hang Seng was also lifted by Beijing's decision allowed Chinese investors to invest in Hong Kong-listed dual-class shares. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. Further updates, stay tuned to Indices.